Do you have friends, family, lovers? Can you call any of them for help with finding a job or getting picked up from the airport? If so, then congratulations, you have social capital, which is, by one definition, your ability to draw upon your relationships for support, information, resources, or opportunities to further individual and collective goals. Perhaps you've heard of the 6 degrees of separation theory. The idea that any two people on Earth are connected by a chain of no more than 6 social connections. But although you and I may be theoretically connected to each other or to Willem Dafoe, the relationships that connect us may not be strong enough to actually facilitate an introduction. Your social capital encompasses the size and diversity of your network, the quality of your relationships with those people, and all the resources you have access to through them. Though we might push back on this conception of our relationships as a form of capital, I'll be sticking with the term for now. However we choose to describe it, and regardless of what socioeconomic system we find ourselves in, social capital and its related phenomena have a profound effect on our lives. By understanding how it manifests today, for better and for worse, we might have the knowledge to more effectively prefigure social relations that bring us closer to true individual and social freedom, or in other words, anarchy. But first, where does social capital come from? Why do some people have more of it than others? Social capital develops through a whole constellation of factors, which may or may not be in our control. Whether in the workplace, at school, or elsewhere, attractive people tend to receive more attention, trust, and opportunities, which translate into stronger relationships. The same could be said for people who are more charismatic, well-spoken, kind, or funny, because when you light up rooms, people tend to want you in them. The luck of the draw determines where someone is born, where they grew up, and what family and social networks they're shaped by, which will affect what opportunities they'll get to develop their social capital in the future. Having certain skills or expertise can also help someone expand their social network, as people gravitate toward those who have the knowledge or ability they value. Reciprocity creates social capital, and social capital creates reciprocity, as people consistently share information and resources, provide opportunities, and support each other, establishing bonds of obligation and deepening their mutual trust. And as relationships deepen, people develop reputations which affect their relationships. Some are considered reliable, others difficult to work with, and so on. Influence, your ability to affect the thoughts, decisions, and actions of others, both expands social capital and is expanded by it. And over time, shared norms about how people should treat each other develop between those who interact regularly. Our individual and social freedom may no doubt be expanded by the effects of social capital. Even under the status quo, social capital can be positively life-changing. Someone born into poverty, for instance, might otherwise be on the trajectory of dropping out of school, but when embedded in a tight-knit extended family or church community that connects them to opportunities and emotional support, they might be the first of their lineage to attend college and attain some level of economic stability. Still, this is far from a feel-good story. We have to talk about the dark side of social capital, as it often reproduces the hierarchies and prejudices that presently dominate the world we live in. While both men and women have social capital, patriarchy has ensured that men generally have greater access to resources through social capital, while queer people may face exclusion from family networks, workplaces, religious communities, and other social circles. Social capital is further shaped by the impact of racism and colorism. Your racial background or skin tone may be a deciding factor in the perception of your beauty or status, what relationships you develop with others, and thus, what resources and opportunities you're able to access. Colonialism leaves its mark as well. Certain accents, manners of dress, and cultural norms are treated as signs of intelligence or competence, so people who conform more closely to such expectations find it much easier to gain trust and expand their networks, regardless of their actual abilities. Building social capital often requires the ability to attend events, communicate in expected ways, and maintain relationships under conditions that are often inaccessible to many disabled people. And of course, social capital is profoundly determined by economic class. Wealthy capitalists tend to maintain their privilege in part through exclusive social networks that advantage them and their descendants. This is in line with how sociologist Pierre Bourdieu spoke of social capital among elites, where it is convertible into other forms of capital, economic and cultural. Perhaps most troublingly, in tandem with or even independent of authority, social capital can shield harmful people from criticism and consequences. We've all seen examples of abusive partners, respected elders, predatory celebrities, or powerful professionals being protected by their social networks. Of course, this doesn't mean that social capital is bad. There's nothing inherently wrong with people building their relationships and helping each other out. But in an environment shaped by domination, social capital tends to reflect and reinforce that domination. This goes for mainstream institutions like schools and workplaces, but also even the spaces dedicated to resisting the status quo. In some radical spaces, these hierarchies are somewhat effectively resisted, but in many cases, they're simply reproduced unchanged. One of the more popular works on the subject of social dynamics within radical organizing spaces is The Tyranny of Structurelessness, an essay by feminist Jo Freeman. The essay is sometimes used as a kind of trump card against anarchism. And credit where credit is due, it's a pretty snappy title. Or it's treated as if it were a devastating internal critique of the philosophy and practice. But Freeman was writing about specific tendencies she observed within the women's liberation movement of the 70s, not providing a comprehensive critique of anarchism as a whole. And while the essay is often discussed in anarchist circles, Freeman wasn't writing from an anarchist perspective. Other anarchists, like Cathy Levine and Joseph Quinn, have drawn attention to this fact and raised their own critiques of Freeman's article. Link below. But before we address any of the conflations and assumptions underlying her analysis, allow me to summarize her position. Freeman argued that in an effort to counteract the overstructured and elitist nature of the status quo and other left resistance groups, many feminist groups had elevated structurelessness into an unquestioned ideal. While these leaderless groups had proven effective for consciousness raising and discussion, she believed they often struggled when attempting to coordinate larger projects, make collective decisions, and sustain long-term activity. More importantly, she argued that truly structureless groups don't actually exist, and that the real distinction lies between formal and informal structures. In her view, informal groups enable existing friendship networks and influential personalities to exercise disproportionate influence over the group without clear accountability, forming a covert elite that is difficult to challenge. She recommended that organizations embrace formal structures with an explicit distribution of authority and transparent procedures in order to counteract the influence of the covert elite. I think Freeman gestures toward a real phenomenon, but I don't think she accurately diagnoses the problem or provides a useful remedy. I agree that structurelessness doesn't exist. I would take it a step further than Freeman does and point out that this is probably a result of people treating structure and organization as synonyms for hierarchy, confusing a lack of hierarchy for a lack of structure. I also agree with some of her recommendations, such as the responsibilities within groups should be clearly and rationally organized, or the resources and information should be widely diffused. But throughout the essay, Freeman fails to clearly identify or distinguish social capital, influence, authority, domination, and different forms of power. This causes her to analyze friend groups as elites with power over the larger groups they're part of. She speaks not of delegating or rotating tasks or responsibilities, but of delegating and rotating authority, as if the terms were interchangeable. At one point in the essay, Freeman openly foreclosed anarchist possibilities by pointing that we must find some middle ground between domination and ineffectiveness. But keen-eyed anarchists would recognize that not every form of influence is a form of domination, and not every social asymmetry constitutes a hierarchy with elites. These important distinctions get obscured when we center our analysis on power, an extremely broad term open to various equivocations, instead of using more precise terminology. So allow me to clarify a few terms that are so often lumped together, and in doing so, clarify the contention. Consider this Anarchism 101. Power is, broadly, one's capacity to affect the world, and it can take many forms. We might speak of power to, the ability to act or accomplish something, power with, the collective capacity created through cooperation, and power over, the ability to dominate others. These forms of power can certainly overlap, but they also describe distinct phenomena. Domination occurs when individuals or groups are subjected to the authority of other individuals or groups. Authority here refers to the recognized right above others to give commands, make decisions, control resources, and enforce obedience. It's often conflated with expertise, responsibility, or coordination, but those are distinct concepts. Authority is the socially recognized claim that some individuals or groups are entitled to occupy superior positions in a hierarchy and that others must defer to them because of that position. A hierarchy is a social arrangement in which individuals or groups occupy ranked positions above and below each other. It should not be confused with mere differences between people, but specifically where those differences are recognized and enshrined into superior and subordinate social roles, like ruler and subject, boss and worker, men and women under patriarchy, white and non-white under racial hierarchy, or majority and minority under democracy. Occupying the superior position within a hierarchy tends to come with certain privileges, like legal protections and presumed competence. Influence, as we established earlier, is simply the ability to affect the thoughts, decisions, or actions of others. Every day we influence and are influenced by our friends, families, lovers, and even strangers. Influence can emerge from attractiveness, charisma, expertise, reputation, popularity, and several other factors. It may involve insidious elements like manipulation, indoctrination, peer pressure, or even authority, but does not by itself entail a right to command. There's still a difference between being listened to and being obeyed. Both authority and influence can be considered forms of power. But while anarchists may seek influence and power with, in order to expand each individual's power to the extent that it does not violate the freedom of others, we nevertheless oppose authority and power over. The fact that some people are more persuasive, respected, knowledgeable, or well-connected than others is an inevitable feature of social life. But the existence of asymmetries in influence or social capital does not by itself establish relations of command and obedience. The question, at least for anarchists, is not whether such differences between people exist, but whether or not they reflect and reinforce hierarchies. Social capital can be mobilized for domination and exclusion or resistance and solidarity, all depending on its context. Under capitalism, social capital reinforces the class divide, while patriarchy and racial supremacy further shape the social landscape. If we wish to move toward a society organized around freedom rather than authority, we must work to ensure that social capital can no longer be translated into a tool in the arsenal of rulership, and is instead used to serve anarchist ends. The seed of what I'm gesturing toward exists in practice, however flawed, even under the current order. Families, friends, and entire communities have used their strong bonds to effectively resist capitalist and state encroachment on their lives. In Spain, for instance, the tenants' union in Catalonia has successfully resisted evictions and landlord abuses by mobilizing neighbors and allies. And just as social capital can amplify the impunity of abusers, it can also amplify accountability. Victims, when backed by a robust social network, are far more likely to receive the support they need. In a society without rulers, there will still be those who have greater expertise or who are better connected than others. Anarchy can't eliminate social gravity. But we must resist the structures by which such differences between people can be hardened into domination. Thus, we cannot, as Freeman and others often prescribe, establish democratic institutions as some kind of solution to the problems of imbalanced and unaccountable influence. I've addressed the issue of democracy in more depth in a recent video, so you can look at that one for further critique. But my main argument here is that democratic organization translates social capital and influence into authority. Those who are more trusted, rhetorically skilled, or well-connected will be disproportionately capable of determining who gets elected, who gets committee appointments, how proposals are framed, and what decisions ultimately become binding on the assembly, union, or party. More fundamentally, however, proposals for democratic organization rest on the rarely questioned assumption of the polity form. Anarchist Sean P. Wilbur noted that we assume the body of a group must have a head that directs it. This is the polity form. It may be democratic or autocratic, but it certainly isn't anarchic. Anarchists seek free association, society as a headless network organized according to the ability and initiative of each individual to associate or disassociate with others according to their specific interests, goals, or desired actions, enabling each and everyone to maximize their freedom. Freeman treats the group as a site of struggle over legitimate decision-making authority. The central problem is repeatedly framed as determining who is really directing the group, whose approval matters, whose influence shapes collective decisions, and how those processes can be formalized and regulated. She interprets friendship networks as factions of elites competing for influence over collective decisions. But her prescription enshrines factionalism as it affirms a space with a monopoly on legitimate decision-making that different groups will attempt to capture. If you have organizing experience, you may have already met a few petty would-be dictators and dealt with the fallout of their power struggles. For anarchists, groups are means to specific ends forged through free association and shaped by the fluidity of people's real interests. Differences and conflicts will remain exactly what they are. Differences and conflicts that may coexist or be resolved without recourse to governance. Interestingly, some of Freeman's observations actually point to this approach. She notes that informal groups tend to function best under certain conditions. When they are organized around concrete tasks, when communication is frequent, when participants share sufficient common ground to cooperate effectively, and when responsibilities emerge from the practical requirements of the activity itself. In her words, when a group has no specific task, people turn their energies to controlling others in the group. But groups engaged in practical activity tend to learn how to work with one another despite personal differences. It's as I've said before, even if you and I disagree on XYZ, we can probably still work together on ABC. Rather than beginning with a fixed polity, tasked with accommodating every possible difference when collectively determining its direction, free association forms groups around specific directions, goals, projects, and needs. If we're concerned about minimizing the harm resulting from social capital, we must also consider the gift economy a bit more cautiously. Don't get me wrong, I think the reciprocal exchange of food, clothing, housing, childcare, healthcare, hospitality, art, and so on derived from social capital will always have a place in a free society. But traditional gift economies often didn't live up to the rosy picture that is sometimes painted of them. They could be shaped by patriarchy and clan divisions. Outsiders, social deviants, unpopular individuals, or people unable to reciprocate in expected ways could be left in a vulnerable position. The gifts weren't exactly free gifts either. They carried obligations to give, receive, and reciprocate, and social consequences for not fulfilling those obligations. So while gift economies may always form part of the economic landscape, they can't be the only option. I consider other approaches, like the communist anarchist common storehouses and mutualist markets, to be valuable pieces of the puzzle too. There is no one-size-fits-all economic solution. Going forward, I believe we must continue to build on our social capital while remaining vigilant of and counteracting its harmful effects. Pay attention to when newcomers or the neurodivergent are marginalized unintentionally and make a conscious effort to bring in their perspectives through more active facilitation. When we delegate tasks, coordinate our activities, and listen to expertise, let's be considerate of how blind admiration or over-dependence might distort our free will. And as anthropological studies of relatively egalitarian societies have demonstrated, we must practice a deliberately anti-authoritarian culture to keep would-be tyrants in check and effectively resist the translation of influence into authority. In doing so, we might ensure that those we love and rely on continue to shape our freedom for the better. All power to all the people. Peace. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share with your fellow peoples. Thanks to the seedlings, the saplings, and especially the roots for making all of this possible. And including our newest member, Green Eggs and Ham. You can join these beautiful humans and support me too on patreon.com/SayingTrue, or right here on YouTube with a YouTube membership. Check out my other videos for a range of radical topics. Thanks again. Peace.